Detroit didn't hear the knock coming. One day, American car companies owned the roads. The next, families were quietly parking Toyotas and Hondas in their driveways and not going back. No explosions. No dramatic collapse overnight. Just a slow, brutal realization. The cars people trusted the most weren't American anymore. And once that trust was gone, entire brands never recovered. This story isn't about betrayal or cheap imports. It's about how Japanese car makers did something American companies didn't think mattered, until it was too late. Keep watching, because near the end, there's a moment in the 1980s where Detroit could have stopped everything. They saw the threat clearly. They just didn't believe it would last. That decision changed the American car industry forever. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to a time when American cars ruled unquestioned. The 1950s and 60s post-war America. Factories humming, highways expanding, families moving into suburbs. If you lived in Cleveland, St. Louis, or Fresno, your dad probably drove a Ford Chevy or Chrysler. American cars were big, powerful, and proud. They weren't just transportation. They were proof America was winning. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Japan was rebuilding from ruins. Their car industry didn't exist to dominate. It existed to survive, and that difference shaped everything. In the 1960s, Japanese cars started showing up in the US tiny things. Underpowered. Bare bones. Honestly. Kind of embarrassing. If you drove a Japanese car back then, people noticed. Not in a good way. American drivers laughed. Dealers shrugged. Detroit wasn't worried. Why would they be? Japanese cars weren't competing. They were occupying a different universe. Then the 1970s hit, and everything changed. Gas prices exploded, lines wrapped around blocks. People in places like New York and California suddenly cared about fuel economy. American automakers weren't ready. Their entire system was built around big engines and cheap gas. Japanese companies were ready by accident, because they had to be. Their cars were small, efficient, and cheap to run. Suddenly, what looked weak looked smart. Toyota, Honda, Datsun. They weren't flashy, but they worked. They started every morning. They didn't overheat. They didn't fall apart. And here's the detail that quietly destroyed American brands. Japanese cars didn't break, at least not the way American cars did. Owners noticed. Not immediately. But after a few years, patterns formed. Your neighbor's Toyota hit 100,000 miles. Your Ford needed major repairs. That comparison mattered more than advertising ever could. Detroit responded the way big companies often do. Denial. They said Japanese cars were cheap toys. That Americans would come back. That loyalty would save them. But loyalty doesn't survive bad experiences. Now, let's talk about quality. Because this is where the real damage happened. Japanese automakers approached manufacturing differently. They obsessed over process, continuous improvement, stopping the assembly line if something went wrong, listening to workers on the floor. American factories? They prioritized volume. Build fast, fix later. Warranty can handle it. That worked when competition was weak. It failed when competition cared. By the late 1970s, Consumer Reports started ranking Japanese cars higher. Reliability became a talking point. Trust became currency. And Detroit was losing both. Here's the problem American brands didn't see coming. People don't forget reliability. Once someone buys a car that never lets them down, it becomes their default choice. Their kids grow up in it. They recommend it. They defend it. Brand loyalty shifts silently. By the 1980s, Japanese brands weren't outsiders anymore. They were building factories in America. Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee. They hired American workers, paid competitive wages, and produced cars Americans loved. That destroyed another argument. Buy American stopped meaning what it used to. If a Toyota was built in Kentucky and your Chevy came from Mexico, the line blurred. Detroit felt cornered, so they tried copying. Smaller cars, front-wheel drive, fuel efficiency. But copying the shape wasn't enough. The culture didn't change. Quality still lagged. Consistency still suffered. And customers noticed. This created an emotional problem. American automakers didn't just lose sales. They lost credibility. Every recall reinforced the narrative. Every breakdown confirmed the stereotype. And stereotypes are hard to kill once they feel earned. Now, let's talk about pride. Because pride played a huge role in the collapse. Detroit believed they were the industry. They had history, scale, influence. Japanese companies were supposed to follow their lead. Instead, they rewrote the rules. Lean manufacturing, Just-in-time inventory, designing cars around how people actually lived, not how companies wanted them to live. That mindset shift was lethal. Because while American brands debated identity, Japanese brands focused on the customer. What do they need? What frustrates them? What keeps them coming back? Those questions sound obvious now. They weren't then. By the 1990s, the damage was undeniable. Honda was dominating compact cars. Toyota owned mid-size sedans. Lexus embarrassed luxury brands. American companies still sold trucks. But cars? They were losing, and losing fast. Entire nameplates disappeared. Oldsmobile, Plymouth, Pontiac. These weren't killed by one bad year. They were starved over decades. Here's where the story gets personal. Imagine a factory worker in Michigan in the 1980s. He builds cars, buys American, believes in the system. Then his daughter buys a Honda because it's reliable, cheap to maintain, and doesn't cause stress. That's not betrayal, that's survival. And once families start choosing peace of mind over patriotism, the shift is permanent. American automakers tried fighting back with marketing. Heartbeat of America, like a rock, powerful ads. But ads can't cover mechanical failure, and customers were done giving second chances. Now let's explore the moment everything tipped. It wasn't a recession. It wasn't regulation, it was trust. Once Japanese brands owned reliability in the public mind, the game changed. American brands could innovate, they could improve. But they were chasing. And chasing is exhausting. Then came the 2008 financial crisis. The final blow. Sales collapsed. American automakers begged for help. Japanese automakers didn't. That contrast was brutal. One side looked fragile. The other looked disciplined. Even people who wanted to support American companies hesitated. Fear is powerful. And fear pushes people toward what feels safe. Japanese cars felt safe. That's the challenge Detroit couldn't solve. How do you rebuild trust once it's broken at scale? Some companies adapted. Ford improved quality dramatically. GM restructured. But others never recovered. Brands died quietly. Factories closed. Communities changed. The rise of Japanese cars didn't just destroy American brands. It exposed weaknesses that had been ignored for decades. Complacency, short-term thinking, disconnection from the customer. Japanese automakers didn't win by being aggressive. They won by being consistent. And consistency beats power over time. Here's the climax. Japanese cars didn't destroy American car brands by attacking them. They destroyed them by showing customers a calmer alternative. No drama, no stress, just cars that worked. Once Americans experienced that, there was no going back. Detroit wasn't defeated by better marketing or cheaper prices. They were defeated by trust erosion. And trust, once lost, is brutally expensive to rebuild. That's the real story. Today, the American car industry looks different, smaller, more focused, more careful. But the scars remain. Every quality initiative, every reliability promise, every long warranty. It all traces back to that moment when Japanese cars quietly earned America's confidence and changed everything. If you want to understand how one American automaker almost fixed this problem and then nearly lost it again, watch the next video on your screen. Subscribe for more deep automotive and business history stories, and comment below whether reliability or loyalty matters more to you when choosing a car.